Hello my friends and fans, and welcome to How to Train Your Dragon Month. Well, I've just seen The Hidden World and it is amazing! It really does feel like a perfect finale, the animation's amazing, the action scenes, the character development, it's all really good. And I can't wait to talk about my opinion of it with all you guys and... Oh wait, the movie doesn't come out in America until the end of the month. Oh well, doesn't mean I still can't celebrate the impending release with y'all. Let's start by discussing what makes the DreamWorks series differ from its literary roots. As it would be much easier to list the way they are similar, let's start there, shall we? First up, the characters of Hiccup and Stoic, in the first movie at least, are actually really close to their book counterparts. Hiccup is described in the book as being short, skinny, with an unmemorable face that you'd never pick out in a crowd, old, and all sorts of and overall just an unremarkable Viking specimen. The only difference between film Hiccup and book Hiccup is that book Hiccup is described as having spiky, sticky up hair that never goes down no matter how much you try and flatten it, whereas film Hiccup does not have that. Stoic the Vast, on the other hand, is very close to his book counterpart in the sense that he does care for his son and wants to see him succeed in life, but can't ever get past his pure, lack of Vikingness. The key difference between book and film in this regard is that book Stoic is much more stubborn, whereas film Stoic was able to come around to accept how great Hiccup truly was and as over the span of one film. It takes book Stoic 10 books to get to that point. While design-wise, Fishlegs is nothing like his book counterpart, who's basically just as scrawny as Hiccup and even more useless than him when it comes to Viking stuff. And even his personality doesn't quite match, whereas obsessive love of dragons and obsessing over their various powers and stats is actually something he shares in common with book Hiccup, where book Fishlegs didn't really know that much about dragons either. One thing the two Fishlegses do have in common with each other is that they aren't ultimately all that Viking-like in their personality. Book Fishlegs aspires to be a bard and would much rather live a peaceful existence and be a brawny, loutish Viking type. Movie Fishlegs, while not quite having this aspirations, is the most gentlest of all the Vikings we see, and is also the only one who never directly bullies Hiccup, mostly just ignoring him. In How to Train Your Dragon 2, one part of Snotlout's redesign is having the faint traces of a mustache on his upper lip. This is something he actually has in common with his book counterpart, who's been described as having the faint beginnings of a mustache, even in the first book, where he's not yet 13. Gobbler Belch is a teacher in both versions, with the primary difference being that book Gobbler teaches full-time. One of the most startling similarities between book and film is that the plot of the first movie has a lot of parallels between the story of Hiccup the First, which we learnt in Book 9. Don't believe me? Well, the story of Hiccup the First is a story about a young boy who comes across a killer dragon in the woods that's wounded, and he nurses it back to health, and together they form a bond. Hiccup the First learns how to ride the dragon, and in return learns how to speak Dragonese, is taught how to speak Dragonese, language of the dragons, and together they wind up stopping a Viking-human war, or bringing peace where dragons and humans live in equality. Does that ring any bells? Well, it should, because that's pretty much the basic plot of the first movie. I'm serious. It's really close, and I have no idea whether this is coincidence or whether the movie wound up influencing the book series. Speaking of giant dragons, the one at the end of the first movie actually caused a bit of a tiff as to what it was actually called. The soundtrack called it the Green Death, which is its actual name in the book, but then later sources started calling it the Red Death, and given that those later sources include the TV show and shorts and stuff, I think it's safe to bet that that the Red Death is actually the canon name. In the final season of Race to the Edge, Hiccup and co. learn that the lenses of the Dragon Eye, an important object in the show, can point the way to the legendary King of Dragons. This prompts a quest to find all the remaining lenses before the Dragon Hunters do, as they've already found some before in the previous seasons without realizing their significance. This detail is similar to the King's Lost Things from the books, 10 objects that reveal who is worthy of being crowned King of the Wilder West. By the time we learn of the things and what they are, it becomes apparent that Hiccup has already found 8 of them without knowing it. In How to Train Your Dragon in the Hidden World, Hiccup and the riders have outfitted themselves with fireproof dragon scale armor that matches their dragons. These suits, especially Hiccup's, bear a resemblance to the fire suits. These were introduced in Book 5 and were commonly sported by the Lava-Louts of Lava-Lout Island. While they're fireproof like in the film, they're also made of dragon skin, something that definitely isn't true in the film. Although that being said, Drago's cape is dragon skin, so I guess that counts as a similarity. And of course, one of the most direct connections with the books comes at the end of How to Train Your Dragon 3, The Hidden World, when And now, on to the many ways the films and TV series differ. Movie Hiccup is completely alone in the first film, whereas book Hiccup could still confide in Fishlegs, Toothless, his grandfather Old Wrinkly, Kamikaze, the Windwalker, and eventually the Wodensang. Toothless is not an ultra badass Night Fury in the books, but a common or garden dragon whose only interesting characteristics are his unusually small size and his utter lack of teeth, hence the name Toothless. Dragons can talk in the books. Well, sort of. They have their own language, Dragonese, which Hiccup has taught himself how to speak. This is his only advantage in dragon training, as his yelling skills are appalling. Berk is suitably grey for somewhere that may be Scottish, but it does not constantly rain. In the books, Berk is described as being constantly damp and wet. In Riders of Berk, we are introduced to the DreamWorks equivalent of Alvin the Treacherous, Hiccup's archfoe from the books. He looks nothing like his book counterpart, and the only thing you could consider charming about him is that he's voiced by Mark Hamill. That being said, there are occasions where TV Alvin shows some of the guile and intelligence of his book counterpart, and one positive difference between the two versions is that TV Alvin managed to keep all of his limbs. Book Alvin was not quite so lucky in that regard. Gobber the Belch also has all of his limbs. He's also much more of a drill sergeant and was never a blacksmith to begin with. Astrid, Roughnut, Heather, Dagger the Deranged, Savage, Spiteout, Dragon's Edge, the Defenders of the Wing Maidens, and all of the new dragons introduced after the first movie are completely absent from the books. That being said, Astrid may have been inspired by Kamikaze, heir to the Bogburgle tribe and Hiccup's other best friend. Speaking of the twins, Toughnut does have the book counterpart, a minor character called Toughnut Jr. In the one scene where he has significant screen time, he is described as being polite and hopeless at insults, which definitely does not apply to film Toughnut. Snotlout is much more of a bully in the books, physically tormenting Hiccup and Fishlegs. He's also 3 years older than Hiccup and his cousin. His resentment for Hiccup stems from the fact that he is no longer next in line for the chiefdom of Berk. Snotlout's monstrous nightmare is called Fireworm in the books. Hookfang is the name of one of Stoic's dragons. In the TV show, Fireworm is the name given to a whole species of dragons. The relationship between dragon and Viking in the books is more like pets or slaves than the equal partnerships depicted in the films. Interestingly, equal partnership was the status quo in the backstory relating to Hiccup I's lifetime, and in the last few books, Hiccup himself is trying to bring the status quo back into being. By the end of How to Train Your Dragon 2, Hiccup becomes chief of Berk. In the books, while Hiccup was always next in line for the chiefdom, he never got that chance due to the Dragon Rebellion. Instead, Hiccup's destiny is to be the heir of Grimbeard the Ghastly, the next king of the Wilder West. It takes 4 books to reach this goal due to a small complication. So, that is every similarity and difference between the How to Train Your Dragon books and the DreamWorks franchise. I will see you all next time as we celebrate How to Train Your Dragon Month. Goodbye, subscribe, and go do whatever it is you're going to spend the rest of your day doing.